Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 1 to 5 player game, The Princes of Florence, designed by Wolfgang Kramer, Richard Ulrich, and Jens Christopher Ulrich, and published by WizKids, who helped sponsor this video. As the head of a wealthy Italian family, you'd like to put your fortune to good use, funding the works of several local artisans. Build up your estate with the housing and tools they need, and soon you'll be the most prestigious prince or princess of Florence. So join me at the table, and let's learn how to play. To set up, place this game board in the center of the play area and add this round marker to the one space of the round track here. Next, find the landscape tiles, which come in 3 types: forests, lakes, and parks, as well as the building tiles, which come in a variety of types, and group all of these together by their shapes. Now set each stack onto the spaces for them shown on the main board, like I'm doing here, so it looks like this when you're done. You'll also find spaces on the board for what are known as the builder and jester tokens, which you'll stack into those spaces. These are the 3 different types of freedom tiles, and you'll stack a number of each onto the matching spaces of the board equal to the number of players minus 1. In this video, we'll assume that we have 3 players, so we'll stack 2 of each of these tiles onto the board, and all the rest of them you return to the box. Near the board, create a space for the bank, which will contain all these money tokens referred to as florins that I've organized into some trays that I have. Now find the prestige, recruiting, and bonus cards, which have these backs, and give them each a shuffle. The prestige deck is placed here, the bonus cards go here, and the recruiting deck you'll flip face up and set into this space. Now each player collects one of these double-sided principality boards. For your first game, they recommend using this standard side, and we'll learn what the other side is used for later in this video. Everyone also takes one of these player boards set to either side, along with the matching colored pawn, prestige disc, and player screen to hide the starting 3,500 florin they'll take from the supply. Each player now sets their prestige disc on the 0 space of this prestige track that goes around the outside edge of the board. Now find and shuffle the profession cards, which have this back, and deal 4 of them to each player. You can examine your own cards, but keep them a secret from the other players and pick 3 of them to keep. Later in the video, you'll learn why you might want to keep some over others, but either way, each person should discard their unchosen profession face down with the other unchosen and undealt cards. All of these leftovers are shuffled into a single deck and then set onto the space for them found here on the board. You can now give everybody one of these player aids, and the person who was last in Italy is then given this starting player marker. Or you can just choose someone randomly. And that's the setup. Now the rules for a 2-player game are slightly different, but we'll explain those later. In the Princes of Florence, you'll be placing bids to acquire benefits for your estate in order to attract professionals who complete works of art for you, scoring you prestige points. Have the most prestige points by the end of the game, and you win. The game is played over 7 rounds, and each round is broken into 2 phases, starting with the auction phase. Here, the starting player picks any one of the 7 stacks of objects found in this area of the board to start an auction for. Either parks, lakes, forests, prestige or recruiting cards, builders, or jesters. Now we'll see why you might want to pick one over the other a little later, but to begin with, the starting player picks any one of these stacks, let's say forests, and starts the bidding at exactly 200 florin. Then going in clockwise order, each other player either increases the current bid by exactly 100 florin or passes. Once you pass, you're out of the current auction, but bidding will continue around and around the table like this until all players have passed, except for one. That remaining player has won the bid and pays the final amount to the bank. The players who lost the bid pay nothing. The winner now takes the item they won from the related stack and sets their pawn beside or on the stack it came from. Their pawn will act as a reminder that this stack cannot be chosen for future auctions this round. The player who won the auction must now resolve the item they collected, and we'll see how each of these items work in a moment, but for now, let's just continue explaining auctions. If the player who began the previous auction, the start player in our case, didn't win the bid, they now choose a new stack to begin an auction for, but cannot choose one with a player pawn. On the other hand, if the player who started the previous auction did win the bid, then the next player seated clockwise from them, who still has their pawn in front of themselves, starts the next auction. Either way, each auction is run exactly the same. The player picks a stack with no pawn beside it and begins the bid at exactly 200 florin. Then going clockwise around and around the table, each player either increases the bid by 100 florin or passes. However, a player whose pawn is already on the game board, in other words, one who has already acquired an item this round, cannot bid in any future auctions. In this way, each player can win at most one auction per round. Now let's say you're the person who's required to start an auction, but you don't want to bid the initial 200 florins. You're not forced to. Instead, you set your pawn by the board to show you've removed yourself from bidding and won't be able to bid on any other auctions this round. Then the next player seated clockwise starts an auction. Now eventually, if there's only one player left with a pawn in front of themselves, they're in an auction alone. They simply pick a stack without a pawn, pay 200 florin to the bank, and collect the related item, ending all of the auctions. Or they could pass and take nothing, which also ends the auctions. So just to make sure it's clear, during this auction phase, each player may acquire at most one item. After that, they can no longer participate in auctions. Also, as soon as an item is taken from a stack, no more items from that stack can be chosen this round for auction. A player's pawn beside or on its stack will remind you of this. If a stack is ever empty, no more objects of that type can be auctioned. And finally, you always keep your money hidden behind your screen. And you're even allowed to bid more money than you currently have, but only if you can pay the difference in prestige points. We'll see how you earn prestige later, but it's tracked here. And let's say we already had 5 prestige. At any time during the game, during auctions or otherwise, you can move your prestige marker backwards on this track, and for each space moved, you gain 100 florin from the bank. The only time you can't do this is if you have no prestige left. So you can only bid more money than you currently have during an auction if you have the required prestige points to spend to pay the full amount that you would owe. And with that, we've covered how auctions work. But remember, after winning an auction, you immediately resolve the item you've collected before the next auction begins. So let's go through all 7 of the objects now. There are 3 different types of landscape tiles, but they all work in a similar way. When you acquire one of these, you must immediately add it to any empty spaces in your principality. It can be placed on either side and rotated in any way, as long as it fits within the outlined squares of the grid. However, tiles can never overlap other tiles or the pre-printed structure here. As long as you have room, you can have any number of landscape tiles in your principality, and every duplicate landscape that you add earns you 3 prestige points. So when I add this second forest, I gain 3 points, and another 3 points for this one. On the other hand, if I add a lake, I get nothing for that since it's my first one, but my second lake would score me 3 points, and so on. Anytime you earn prestige, you move your marker that number of spaces forward on this track. If you ever earn enough points that you pass the 50 space, you start over from the start of the track, but show that you've already earned 50 points by finding and putting the 50-point disc in your color in front of yourself. If you later cross the 50-point space again, flip your 50-point token to its 100-point side, and then keep going. With that, we've covered placing landscapes. They have other benefits, as we'll see, but for now, let's learn about prestige cards. When you win an auction for one of these, draw the top 5 cards from its deck, or as many as you can if less than 5 remain. Secretly examine them and pick one to keep, putting it face down next to your player board. The rest you'll put face down in any order you choose at the very bottom of the prestige deck. Each prestige card provides a secret way that you can earn additional points at the end of the game if you've fulfilled their conditions, and we'll learn more about this during final scoring. Winning a recruiting card auction lets you add the top one to your hand. But how you use these will make more sense once we know a few more of the rules, so we'll come back to them a bit later. Instead, next, let's look at builders. If you gain one of these from an auction, add it to the topmost empty space here. If you gain a second builder later, gain 3 prestige and add it here. A third builder would earn you 3 more prestige and fills in this space. A player may never have more than 3 builders during the game. Each builder will provide you with the benefits shown beside it as you gain them, but we'll learn about these a little later in the video. Lastly, we come to the Jesters. When you acquire one of these, place it on this theater stage of your player board. Each Jester will help boost the quality of an action taken in the next phase, so we'll learn about it then. Just be aware, over the course of the game, a player can collect any number of the items we've discussed, except for builder tokens. A player can only have, at most, 3 of those. All right, after every player has acquired an object during an auction and resolved it, or chosen not to participate in the auction phase ends. Each player collects their pawn from wherever it is, and then it's time for the action phase. Here, beginning with the starting player and going clockwise once around the table, each player takes a turn, and on your turn, you'll perform up to 2 actions. There are 5 to choose from, but you must finish your first action before starting your second, and you can even perform the same one for both actions if you like. With that in mind, let's go through each action, starting with building a building. To do this, you return 700 florins to the bank, as it shows here, and then you take any one of the buildings from the stacks in this area of the main board. Let's take one of these university tiles. Anytime you build a building, you also gain 3 prestige, as it shows here. You must now immediately add the tile to your principality, and these are added just like landscapes, with a couple of exceptions. Buildings may not share any part of a side with another building, including this pre-printed one here in the corner. At most, they can only touch another building on the corner. That said, buildings can share sides with landscapes, and landscapes can be set adjacent to buildings and/or other landscapes. Just keep in mind you may only have at most 1 of each type of building on your board, and once a tile is placed, it cannot be moved or removed later. So choose wisely, because buildings will provide you with benefits, as we'll see later. Speaking of benefits, if you have a single builder token, instead of each building costing you 700 florins, they now only cost you 300. If you have 2 builders, you're now allowed to put buildings adjacent to one another on your board. And if you have 3 builders, you pay 0 florins for buildings. They still cost you an action, but you collect them for free. And that was the build a building action. Next, let's learn the acquire a bonus card action. Bonus cards are found here, and this action works the same as acquiring one of these profession cards, so let's learn both actions at the same time. For either one, you pay 300 florins, as it shows here, and then you draw the top 5 cards from the related deck, or as many as you can if fewer than 5 are remaining. You secretly examine the cards and pick one to keep, adding it to your hand. The rest you return in the order that you choose, face down to the bottom of its related deck. We'll see the benefit of bonus and profession cards in a moment, but there is one important difference between these 2 actions. You can acquire a bonus as both of your actions, but you may only take a profession as one of your 2 actions that round. This is also true of the next action we're going to learn, introducing a freedom. This can also only be taken as one of your actions during a round. These are the freedom tiles, and as it shows here, you pay 300 florins to the bank, and then you can collect any one of them. When you gain a freedom, add it to the matching space of your player board here, and you may never have more than 1 of each type of freedom. We'll see the benefit of freedom tiles in just a moment, and I know I've been saying that there are many rules we'll learn the benefits of in just a moment, but guess what? The moment is here, because many of these rules will come together in the last action we need to discuss, called completing a work. To do this, you pick a profession from your hand to play, and then you calculate the value of the work that artisan is able to create based on the requirements you satisfy on its left side here. These are the various conditions the artisan wants to work under. Let's start with the first condition, which will always show one of the 3 different types of landscape tiles. This one shows a forest tile, so if you have at least 1 forest landscape in your principality, it means you gain 3 points of work value, as shown here. Keep in mind, these don't represent prestige points gained on the prestige track. Prestige is represented by this icon in the game. Right now, we're totaling work value points, represented by this icon. Next, check the icon here that will show one of the 3 different types of freedom tiles. If you have that freedom tile on your player board, add 3 to your current work value total. The next icon will show the type of building the artisan wishes to work in. If you have that building on your principality board, then you add 4 to your current work value total. Next, check the icon here, which represents Jester tokens. Check your theater area, and for each Jester token you have there, add 2 points to your total. Now we'll resolve these next 2 icons on the profession card. These will give you 1 more work value point for every recruiting and profession card you have in your hand or on the table. Cards end up on the table when you complete a work like we're trying to do right here, so also be sure to include the profession card that you're currently resolving. Finally, this icon allows you to play as many bonus cards as you have and want to. Each bonus card will increase your work value by the amount it shows for each time you fulfill its condition. So in this case, I'd add 2 for every forest in my principality. You now set your pawn onto the space of the prestige track that matches your final work value total for that profession card. And you also return any bonus cards you might have played with this action back to the box. The profession you chose is then set face up by your player board. Now, if the total work value generated is not equal to or higher than the required minimum work value for the current round, which is shown here below the round marker, then you cannot take this action and play that card. So before starting the action to complete a work, be sure to check the work value math privately so you know you'll meet the required value. Assuming you were able to perform the action, you now earn money from the bank equal to the profession's final work value multiplied by 100. So in this case, 2,000 florin. Before taking any of that money, you can choose to take less. And for every 200 florin you don't take, you gain 1 prestige point instead. For example, I'm owed 2,000 florin, but maybe I'll take 800 less in order to go up by 4 prestige points, collecting just 1,200 florin. That ends the action, but leave your pawn on the prestige track. You'll be checking its placement again later in the round. If you end up completing a second work in the same round, you'll gain florin based on that work's separate total work value. You then move your pawn to whichever action had the higher total work value. Do not add the 2 work values together. With those rules understood, we can now explain how to resolve a recruiting card when you gain one during an auction. You can either play it right away or save it to play during your turn in a future action phase, but either way, it doesn't use up one of your 2 actions. When you would play it, first choose a face-up profession card previously played by an opponent as part of their complete a work action and take it into your hand, setting the recruiting card in its place. The profession you took now becomes one you can use for a complete work action later. As these state, they count as a profession card for the purposes of determining work values and for bonus and prestige cards that might apply to them. And those are all the actions. Just remember, you can take up to 2 on your turn, and you can do the same action more than once, except for taking a profession card or introducing a freedom. Each of those actions can only be taken once per turn. After all the players have completed their actions, it's then time to resolve the end of the round. Players who completed a work compare the placement of their pawns on the track, and the highest player earns 3 prestige, even if they were the only one who completed a work. Players who are tied for highest each earn the 3 prestige. Either way, all players now reclaim their pawns from wherever they may be, putting them back beside their player boards. The current starting player now passes the token to the next player clockwise, who will be the start player for the next round. That round begins now by advancing the round marker. If this had just been the end of the 7th round, the game now ends. At that point, each player reveals and then scores any prestige cards they have. For example, this one scores you 8 points if you have 1 of each type of landscape tile in your principality. If a prestige card requires you to have the most of something, in this case, the most Jesters, then you score the large value if you fulfill the condition, but only the smaller value if you tied for most. Otherwise, the card scores nothing. A player will only earn points for fulfilling their own prestige cards, not for fulfilling the conditions on another player's cards. Now the player with the highest prestige wins. If there's a tie, the tied player with the most money wins. And if there's still a tie, the tied players share the victory. Now, I had mentioned earlier that there are slightly different rules if you have only 2 players, so let's go over those. First, each player starts with 2,500 florin instead of 3,500. You also begin with only 1 type of each freedom on the board, and then you mix up 1 more copy of each and randomly draw 2 of those to add to the board, returning all the rest of the freedoms back to the box. The game is otherwise played the same except for two changes. During the auction phase, the starting bid is always 300 florin instead of 200. Also, the 3 landscape stacks are considered a group item. As soon as someone wins an auction here, they choose any one landscape tile to take, and then no more landscapes can be put up for auction again that round. The game also has rules and components for solo play, and there are 2 included expansions. One is known as the Muse and the Princess. This will give you 6 characters to bid on during the auction phase that each provide a unique power during the game. There's also a cooperative building expansion that will have players adding their landscapes and buildings to a shared tableau of boards, potentially requiring some negotiation. But all of those extra modes I'll leave for you to discover on your own. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play the Princes of Florence. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over at the games page on Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get a notification anytime we post a new video. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can join our Patreon team, which I'll have linked below. But until next time, thanks for watching.